What's up, ladies and gents, it's Scott here and welcome back to FudgeMuppet. We know it's been a while since our last Fallout 4 build and we've been listening to you guys, so I'm excited to announce our latest Fallout 4 build, complete with two incredibly satisfying and extremely badass mods. This is the Constructor, our chainsaw power armor modded build. You heard it right, this handyman turned killer wanders the wasteland in a set of power armor ripped straight from a construction site, complete with a welding mask helmet that will send deathclaws and raiders alike running for the hills. If charging into battle like a juggernaut doesn't leave all his foes trampled into the concrete, the Constructor rips the cord on his chainsaw, shredding through flesh and bone like butter. The Constructor was not always a killer and devoted his life to raising his family from nothing. Born into poverty, he gave everything, only to have it ripped from him on the day the bombs fell. The wasteland can change a man, and with this build you get to experience it all. His character will develop as you play, turning from a humble tradesman to a broken, heartless monster. If you're as excited to try this build as we were to make it, you'll need to know what mods to download, and fortunately for you, there are only two quick and easy downloads. The first is called the Standalone Construction Power Armor, and this gives us our unique power armor aesthetic, perfectly fitting for the Constructor. And the second mod is simply called Murdering Chainsaw, and the name doesn't lie. If there's one thing Fallout 4's combat needed, it was a full-size chainsaw, and it comes complete with really satisfying chain sounds and animations for crunching, gory kills. Playing in third person allows you to utilize the strength of your armor, wielding the chainsaw one-handed, while in first person you can see the carnage up close and personal, holding the chainsaw in two hands as you're inches away from your victim. Don't forget before we begin that timestamps for video navigation needs can be found just below in the description, but with all that said, let's get right into the build. The Constructor was born in the outskirts of Boston, in the kind of neighborhood no one would live in by choice. His family were poverty-stricken. His father died when he was a toddler, having given his life in service of his country. His mother was a well-educated woman but suffered severely from arthritis, making the prospect of the long commute to Boston City a painful one to imagine. The welfare provided as a result of his father's sacrifice was enough to keep them fed and sheltered, but little more. All throughout his young life, the Constructor couldn't help but face the thought that perhaps his family would have been better off if he hadn't been born. No child should feel guilty for eating daily meals, and no child should have to tell their parents not to buy them toys. But the Constructor didn't have the luxury of a regular childhood. He learned to appreciate everything and used to take absolutely nothing for granted. His mother made herself useful by tutoring him in English and science and mathematics after school hours. She hoped to give her son the knowledge to make something of himself. But the majority of the Constructor's life out of school was spent making pocket money. He worked a paper route as soon as he was old enough to see above the counter of the corner store, and he soon landed himself a job at the local junkyard. He enjoyed getting his hands dirty. He liked to feel his exertions and think that every time he lifted a hunk of rusted metal and threw it into the correct pile, he was providing for him and his mother. 2 years later, on his 16th birthday, the junkyard owner offered him an interesting gift. He could take any one thing he wanted from the junkyard, and while to some this may seem almost an insult to the gift, the Constructor's eyes lit up with excitement. He remembered an old wrecked car being dropped off the previous week, a classic car that, with the help of some imagination, still somewhat resembled its former glory. Like an old woman who was once a stunning beauty, that car had something special left in its weathered shell. His boss towed the wrecked car to the Constructor's house, and for 4 years, he slowly worked on it, refurbishing it. By this time, at the age of 20, the Constructor was working as a mechanic, and you guessed it, he drove to work in a vintage car. It had seen better days, and paying for fuel was always a struggle, but it had sentimental value to him that could not be rivaled by any new car. If that car could go from junk to turning heads on the streets of his small nowhere town, then why couldn't he? One day, on a drive through the expanses of rural Massachusetts, the Constructor stumbled upon a woman sitting on the roadside, her beautiful floral dress caked in dirt from the dusty curb. Her car bonnet was open and she was stranded. The Constructor offered to take her home and even fix her car free of charge. It just so turned out that this beauty named Nora also came from a household with little money. The thought of taking money from a needy family in order to feed his own left a sour taste in his mouth. Besides, he knew almost immediately on that peaceful drive back to town that he wanted to raise a family with his woman someday. They were soon to be married, but their hopes of raising a family were rightfully curbed until they were certain they could provide the child with a comfortable life, and that seemed a long way off. The Constructor worked long, grueling hours, not only to provide for Nora, but also for his mother, who he would never abandon so long as she was unfit to work. One day he saw recruiters from the US military. His first response was a tightening in his chest as he grasped at hazy memories of his father, tall and powerful in his army attire. He still remembered being picked up by his father, one hand under each armpit and then a strong, gentle embrace. In over 20 years, he'd never felt a sense of security like he had when his father was at home, on break from service. The thought of joining the military saddened him, and his mother bawled at the thought of losing all she had left. But he promised he would not fight, only do what he does best. And so he did. He served a full term constructing tanks and even working on the T-51 power armor for use in the Anchorage reclamation. By the time he returned to his small town in Boston, he had enough money to finally raise a family of his own. He moved Nora and Sean to the lovely neighborhood of Sanctuary Hills, and he even set his mother up with a property on the other side of town. He could at last lead the life his father would have intended for him. He felt like that classic car, risen from the dirt and transformed into a man who could walk with pride. A tidy ironed shirt, a head held high, and a real purpose in his life. His legacy would live on in comfort and security, and his son would never know the pains of poverty. Just as war took his father, it would soon take everything else from the Constructor. No one knows hardship like the Constructor, yet even he couldn't prepare himself for the suffering he experienced in Vault 111. His wife dead, his son gone, everything he'd worked for gone to rubble and ruin. After leaving the vault, the Constructor will persevere, as he always has done. He will occupy his mind by exhausting his body. He'll work hard, building power armor, constructing settlements, helping survivors. Keeping himself occupied works well to distract him from the pain hammering away in the confines of his mind. The Commonwealth was now a junkyard, and he truly believes he has something to offer, making it a livable place. He will join either the Minutemen or the Brotherhood of Steel, building settlements and helping people. Which of the two to choose is up to you. The Minutemen is a good choice if you wish to focus more on the small-scale, humble helper side of the Constructor, whereas the Brotherhood of Steel are more ambitious and have that sense of military order that the Wasteland needs to thrive again. It is also possible to do both. Either way, he will build plenty of settlements all near each other, and he'll make shops and build turrets and traps and so on. But one special thing about this build is how you will roleplay him from here. Distractions are effective, but what the Constructor has been through can't be fixed up like an old car. Soon it won't be enough, and he will begin to walk a darker path. He worked his whole life to crawl out of the slums, and now the whole world is a slum, and he can't escape it. This will be worsened when he meets Sean again, seeing whatever is left of his son. You can have a lot of fun with this by slowly transitioning from the pleasant, positive responses in conversation to a more nihilistic, negative approach. And when the opportunity to work with the Nuka World Raiders comes along, he is in the perfect place to cave in completely, aligning himself with the pack and the disciples, raiding the settlements he once helped build and sustain. The settlements he owns that generate profits he will leave be, but there are plenty of zones ripe for ravaging. So when building your own bases, try to keep them in one zone, allowing the other zones to become raiding grounds. You can set up the raiders and build arenas and whatever else you please. With this in mind, you should be able to have a lot of fun role-playing the Constructor's tragic arc, from an honest man to a beast corrupted by the wastes. You can even show this through the aesthetics of your power armor. We use the red paint, and this is perfect for the end game character, but maybe early on you can use the standard yellow for a more good color. At the beginning of the game, the Constructor's special stats will be 9 strength, 1 perception, 3 endurance, 4 charisma, 9 intelligence, 1 agility, and 1 luck. The special book in Sean's room will go into charisma. Strength is an essential part of the Constructor's playstyle, as he is a traditional handyman in every way. With all tools, he is an expert, and he lived a life of physical labor. That's why he'll have a solid 9 points there just before getting the bobblehead. The other main stat is intelligence, which he acquired from his mother's teaching and from years and years of hands-on work. He can fix and modify anything, and in the Wasteland, that kind of knowledge is invaluable. With intelligence, you'll have access to every tool you would need, and with strength, you'll have the power to utilize those tools. With the inevitable perk point investments to endurance, this stat will eventually be a big part of the build too. With a final total of 7 points in the stat, the Constructor will be sturdy as a tank. With those stats in mind, let's now get to the important stuff. These are the Constructor's essential perks. From the strength stat, the first perk we'll be taking is all ranks of big leagues. As a melee focused build, this perk is massive. Fully optimized, your melee weapon damage will be doubled, you'll hit all targets in front of you, and you'll have the chance to cripple or disarm opponents, or even perhaps grand slam their head clean off. After that, take armorer and blacksmith perks to make sure you can access all of your melee weapon and armor modifications that you could need. There are no-brainers for the Constructor. Then take 2 ranks of rooted, and this will give you plus 50 damage damage resistance and 50% more damage output with melee and unarmed when standing still. Lastly, from strength get Pain Train. With all 3 ranks, sprinting will be your best friend. While wearing your custom power armor, you'll be able to sprint through enemies, causing a lot of damage and knocking foes to the ground. On top of that, you can make stylish entrances with deadly powerful impact landings. From the perception tree, it's pretty straightforward. All you need to do is invest in all ranks of the Rifleman perk, as the Railway Rifle will be your backup weapon when you need to handle enemies at a distance that your chainsaw cannot handle. Attacks with non-auto weapons will be double as powerful and will ignore 30% of the target's armor. There is also a higher chance to cripple. From endurance, you won't be taking any perks. However, dropping 3 points into the base stat will massively help you survive in combat. The Constructor is a great many things, but subtle is not one of them. You will attract attention in battle, and endurance is your key to walking away unharmed after crushing and sawing your enemies. Next comes Charisma, and the first perk here will be Cap Collector. This will improve your settlement situation a lot, allowing you to not only buy and sell for better prices with vendors, but you'll be able to invest 500 caps to raise a store's buying capacity. This perk is also necessary for making shops at your settlements. After that, grab 3 ranks of Lone Wanderer. With this, you'll take 30% less damage and do 25% more damage, and have an increased carry weight of 100 when without a companion. Lastly, Local Leader will allow you to establish supply lines between your settlements, and the second rank will allow you to build stores and workstations at workshop settlements. Then we have Intelligence, and the first thing to take from this one is 2 ranks of Medic. In doing so, Stimpaks will heal 60% more, and Radaway will remove 60% more rads. Then take 3 ranks of Gun Nut and all ranks of Science. Simply put, these in conjunction with Armor and Blacksmith will guarantee that you can modify all the equipment you need for this build, as well as make all the stuff you need for settlements. Lastly, we have Nuclear Physicist. Take all 3 ranks of this. Fusion cores will last twice as long as a result, and you'll have the ability to eject fusion cores like devastating grenades. There's one more perk to talk about and one more stat, and that is Scrounger from the luck stat. With this, you'll find way more ammo in containers, and you'll have a chance to replenish ammo when firing the last round of your magazine. The main reason to take this as a mostly melee build is to sell random ammo for money. That way you can buy more ammo for your Railway Rifle, as well as all the resources and parts you need. With all of those perks, the playstyle should seem pretty clear. The Railway Rifle will act as the perfect backup for picking off distant targets, while the rest of the time you'll charge into action, knocking foes down, dropping for impact landings, ejecting cores, and most importantly, ripping and tearing with your modded murdering chainsaw. At the end of the game, with all bobbleheads, the special book ends the perk point investments, but not including gear. The Constructor's special stats will be 10 strength, 2 perception, 7 endurance, 6 charisma, 10 intelligence, 2 agility, and 2 luck. Now as for gear, we have some modded power armor and a modded melee weapon. The Construction power armor can only be found randomly by adventuring through the wasteland, but as the Constructor, you should definitely have fun making alternative power armor sets until you can find yourself the endgame gear. Upgrade the full Construction power armor set with red paint for increased endurance and fire resistance with all pieces painted. As I mentioned earlier, this color can be changed and there are many cool looking options, but the red fits his dark arc the best and the end of the game. On the helmet, you'll want the internal database for increased intelligence. On the torso, get the motion assist servos to boost strength. Then on the legs, get overdrive servos to increase sprint speed in exchange for higher action point cost. Your first and most important weapon will be the murdering chainsaw, our modded weapon. This bad boy is perfect for an extremely bloody scene anytime you enter battle, and thankfully the mess you'll make won't stain your red armor. The chainsaw will start appearing in the hands of raiders at level 18. They will appear in merchant inventories for sale starting a little earlier, and even more powerful variants are carried by raiders at level 28. Upgrade the chainsaw with a demolition chain for increased damage and armor penetration, and then the red coat and raider dressing for a chance to cripple and for bonus limb damage. Lastly, you'll want a fully upgraded railway rifle with a long barrel, recoil compensating stock, reflex sight, and a large bayonet. The Constructor has rightfully turned away from his life as a family man and likely won't want the company of any companions. Also, it's best to avoid having followers if you want to reap the benefits of the Lone Wanderer perk. As for settlements, he does build them and he doesn't half-ass it. There should be plenty of defenses, workshops and stores interconnected with the local leader / cap collector combo. As I've talked about earlier in this video, he will keep some under his control while taking others over with the raiders. And that's all folks, I hope you enjoyed our latest Fallout 4 modded build. If you liked the video, maybe press the like button underneath, and if you're new to our build, hit subscribe and the ding bell to keep up with all our future builds. Timestamps and social media links can be found below in the description. Thanks so much for watching guys, I've been Scott and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.